Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in again for another weekly update on news and information about DCS World. I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog, and as always, I do hope this video finds you well. Well, another shorter newsletter actually from Eagle Dynamics this week, but similar to last week, we can pull out some nuggets here to examine a little bit more closely within the contents of what we have. One thing that's pretty obvious is that Eagle Dynamics is building up for a big update to the game, which will of course be what they're referring to here as 2.7.8 for open beta. Now, of course, it will slip into the stable version of the game at some point, usually several weeks afterwards, pending, of course, any fixes or updates they need to do to the main patch, and also depending on what they're brewing on, how big this patch is going to be, we'll see how, efficiently it's introduced into the game. They've been doing a pretty good job of that over the course of this year. So keep tuning in for more information regarding that. I suspect that the patch will either be later this month or possibly into December. As I said, that's kind of how things have been rolling this year so far, so we'll have to wait and see. Of course, it was also dependent on whether they introduce a patch first or the Apache after that, no pun intended here, or whether they combine one big patch here and introduce those things to the game as part of. So we'll have to see how it's all broken down, but that's my guess as to what's going to be coming up. One thing we do know for sure is that the open beta patch pending for 2.7.8 is going to see a major overhaul of the AMRAAM package and how that functions in the game. Now, you'll recall there was a significant rework of this missile logic for the AMRAAM several weeks ago that was signposted. This week, they're telling us that the AMRAAM is a very sophisticated weapon, and as a result of that, what it's demanded as a deep remodeling and debugging of that particular weapon as well. Now, they found essentially several issues in the missile velocity search and tracking algorithms, and also made substantial improvements to the home on jam or HOJ and visual modes. The next stages of development in the missile's evolution is the realistic range gating modeling to enhance the missile's onboard radar to contend with strong ground clutter returns. Now, that's a pretty basic overview of what is really a pretty sophisticated weapon, like I said, that requires a lot of algorithm work. So there's a lot of maths going on in the background for that, and those few paragraphs that I read don't cover all of that, I'm well aware. So let me know what your thoughts are on the AMRAAM, because I know there has been discussion in the forums and other threads about the realism, if you like, and the effectiveness of the AMRAAM, whether it was too good, whether it wasn't good enough, so on and so forth. What I'm suspecting is that it could become more lethal if the ground clutter issue that they are talking about is able to be rectified, or whether it is, again, a representation of a more accurate flight model and a more accurate ability for this weapon to track the targets it's supposed to be tracking, or trying to burn through a jamming signal. So some interesting stuff going on there. Again, some quite sophisticated maths, like I said. Now, moving to a more aesthetic and perhaps easier to grasp thing, Eagle Dynamics is basically looking at completely replacing the entire line of pilots or modeled pilots for Russian helicopters and the airplanes. This includes VKS and the Armed Forces of Russia. Now, it's on track apparently for an introduction in the early part of the new year, which will be good. And you're probably looking at some screenshots here that showcase the ZSH 7AP helmet for the MiG-29, the Su-27, and the Su-33 fighters, with the KM-35 oxygen mask and the NVU-7 helmet-mounted sighting device. The helicopter version of that helmet is equipped with the DMSH boom microphone for both the Mi-8 and the Mi-24 helicopters, respectively. So some cool stuff there. And Eagle Dynamics, if you look around carefully, they do a pretty neat job of including minor aesthetic things that create a good degree of immersion. One thing we have talked about in the air warfare group, actually, we'd love to see the hydraulic fluid and fluid stains on the parking ramps and taxiways on the military bases, which occur. Aircraft, of course, do tend to leak a certain number of fluids or amount of fluids, particularly in the hydraulic department. So that would be cool to see. But again, I digress and my wish list of things. But those are very, very minor in the grand scheme of things, but they're just a nice, way of introducing more immersion in the game, which we love, of course, as sim pilots. Let's turn now to the Apache and what Eagle Dynamics is working on there. Now, they spent a little bit of time talking about the Target Acquisition and Designation Site, or TADS, and it's equipped with a stabilized daylight television camera, a FLIR, or forward-looking infrared camera, and also a laser rangefinder target designator for targeting by displaying video to crew members, helmet display units, or TDAC display units, which is pretty cool stuff. Obviously, this information can also be displayed on the multi-purpose displays as well. Now, the TADS FLIR can also be used apparently as a night vision sensor for night flying by either of the crew members, and this allows the TADS to be slaved to the helmet line of sight of either crew member for nap of Earth flying under what is essentially near total darkness. It's very, very cool. Now, the TADS cameras have multiple fields of view that allow the operators to see large areas for enhanced situational awareness or zoomed in for precise targeting at long ranges. Again, cool stuff. Now, the version that they're working on for the DCS module is also being developed to showcase new FLIR rendering that they are working on that will provide a much improved and more realistic portrayal of the world as seen through infrared. Now, the same technology is also going to be farmed out, if you like, or imported into FLIR sensors and other modules and targeting pods such as the infrared-guided Maverick missiles, which is really good news. So it won't be exclusive to the helicopter itself. Now, this is pretty trick stuff, obviously, and provides, again, some more early glimpses of the degree of capability of the helicopter and what we're likely to see, especially obviously for this night ops stuff. And again, multiplayer missions and online play is going to be very interesting for night missions, which is generally not quite as popular. I'm kind of curious to see how this sensory data, not so much the visual side of it, but all the other situational awareness data link type stuff is also going to be modeled, and how much of it is shared in the real world with ground and air assets to build up that situational awareness, and how much of that is going to be modeled in the game, if at all. But yeah, I'm curious about that. Let me know your thoughts. Some of you asked too, because the Apache is going to be, primarily a ground, I don't want to say pounder, but it's more like a sniper type role, supporting troops primarily and other ground assets, and whether or not there's going to be an increase in the number of modeled battlefield equipment. Obviously, there's this intent to have the chopper frolic in its natural environment, which is, as I said, a ground support aircraft. And obviously, the flying experience is going to become stale if there's nothing to hunt or satiate the aircraft's appetite. And there's really no word from Eagle Dynamics indicating a major injection of new ground assets. Nevertheless, we have seen assets periodically injected into the game over the course of this year. Admittedly, some of those have been, or a lot of them have been, World War II ones. But they don't tend to get the same attention or, of course, the fanfare that we have with the other major modules that we get. I think, though, there's probably enough objects to at least whet your hellfires on for most scenarios or missions. Obviously, though, a dynamic campaign, I would agree, probably needs a lot more ground assets available as part of a modern battlefield. But I expect and I suspect we'll see a major update to the core engine before that dynamic campaign is launched and more assets are introduced. As things stand right now, and this has come up in discussions in the comment section on the channel previously, I really do think that a dynamic campaign right now would probably slow a lot of machines to a crawl. So I think there's going to be some core engine updates before we see major implementations of new assets and things like that. But that's a guess right now, so stay tuned as always. Now, in reality, in terms of the general learning curves of this aircraft, I think we probably have plenty of material to learn. For most of us, the average, virtual pilot, just grasping the flight model, the navigation, learning how to manage those sensory systems that we just talked about proficiently before we complain too much about the lack of things to destroy. In the interim, we'll kind of have to pay close attention to Wags' video for more of those potential learning challenges prior to the aircraft's release. And I think for most of us, that's going to be plenty of learning without having to worry about blowing things up or getting shot down by the things we're trying to blow up. So there you have it. Let me know again what your thoughts are. ED have hinted here that they are looking forward to more previews of the current progress they're making in the very near future. So keep an eye out for that. Of course, it does lead us into the end of the year where we will be getting, as they do every year, an end of year and beyond videos, in this case 2022 and beyond, which hopefully will showcase some things we're going to expect that year. And it reminds me just how quickly the year's gone, and I need to do a yearly review vid for 2021. Of course, the highlight for me would be the clouds, but we've also had a swag of helicopters come through this year and a lot of major changes. So a lot to cover, but those are some highlights, so stay tuned for that. So a shorter newsletter this week, but nonetheless plenty to discuss, especially things like the algorithm for the AMRAAMs and, of course, our preparation for the Apache and the work that's being done there, which looks pretty sophisticated. So again, let me know what your thoughts are and stay tuned for more on that. Now, a couple of community channels worthy of plugging here. One, of course, is Giscoris, my buddy there, who does a lot of fantastic cinematic work for the DCS community. He had another nice video this week, some great shots, just showcasing how beautiful DCS can be just from a flight perspective. Fantastic shots of some of the internal cockpit features that he produced this week, which I really, really appreciated, as well as a few more snippets of the South Atlantic map, which, of course, RASBAM is working on. So stay tuned for more on that as time goes by. There is, I believe, now a Chuck's Guide for the Mosquito. So if you're looking for another resource to help you get to grips with that aircraft, that's a good place to at least start if you're struggling with more formal manuals or trying to get your head around some other people's videos, so on and so forth. But again, another good guide there. And also, my partners over at the Air Warfare Group lined up a really nice video this week, an updated version of the Field of View review and tutorial, if you like, which was very, very popular last year. I think Juice did a video on that, but he's updated some things and you may find that useful. And this is to get the best head position, if you like, using head tracking devices. So check it out. I and another of my fellows over at the Air Warfare Group, we use, and I think I'm referring to Budgie here, we have large curved monitors, and we found that the other Warfare Group guys don't have such big monitors. But of course, when you have a curved monitor, it tends to stretch some things out in the game, depending on the settings that you have. And of course, this was terrible for formation flying. So we were really struggling with depth perception and getting too scared to get close. And so there was this weird spot that I found I was loitering, that I didn't want to get too close, and I just wasn't really nailing formation flying. So it's a challenging thing to do, but when you've got an impediment like that, trying to get your head around, interact with a 2D screen that's representing not an accurate 3D world, that can be a major impediment. So you may find that field of view video really helpful. It's not so much a tutorial, but just a guide on how to get the best out of head tracking and where your head perhaps should be based on what you have as a setup, and how that can be major improvement to your flying experience. So do check that out, and I'll put you should be looking at a banner there, or should have flipped by, but I'll put a link in below as well. So also, I'm going to plug here Mike Solium's channel, the Ops Center. If you haven't checked out Mike's videos, Solly, he does fantastic, very informative videos. They're not too long, they're well broken down, and he covers a lot of really interesting techniques based on the US Air Force, things like formation flying and comms and so on and so forth. He's about to embark on a BFM series as well, which I know a lot of people ask for. People like myself, I'd love to do more on that kind of thing, but it's not my area of expertise, and there's so much material out there, so it can be a little bit confusing, and it's difficult to put it into practice, even just watching somebody else. You'll probably recall that Mover and Gonki did some BFM together, goofing around together. I think Gonki spent most of his time laughing. It was a fun video to watch, and they are going to do a breakdown. But if you're looking for something a little bit more suited to your own needs, I think Solly's channel is going to be the one for you. And he's got some videos worthy of looking as part of a prep for that as well, so do check that out. Again, another link will be in the description below for that. I think you'll find his channel really, really beneficial. All right, so that brings us to the end of this newsletter this week and what's going on in the community. For the most part, of course, there's always tons going on. I'm working slowly on a few other videos that I I've been hoping to put together, but I just haven't had time. Too much other stuff going on. But stay tuned as always for that, and I'm looking forward to this Sunday's training with the Air Warfare Group. So on that note, carry on flying DCS, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.